Lord. Come on, let's give the Lord a hand tonight. Praise the Lord. Amen. Amen. You may be seated. Before you are, or as you are, turn to somebody and just wave at them. Oh, come on. Really wave at them. Raise your arms. All right. So, I don't have any news to give you tonight because nothing's happening. It's unbelievable. I mean, I spend a full day going through the news to get the ones that are appropriate for us to hear, which, by the way, none of them are. But I'm going to give you the news tonight as we see them. So this is the first one I'm going to give you. Anybody knows who he is? Dr. Fauci. Not Fauci. Fauci. Let me tell you why. Now he wants you to wear double masks. Why don't we just make them a little thicker? I mean, anybody think about that? Now, listen, I'm going to forever call him Dr. Fauci because I want to tell you a couple of things about him. He's been the guru and told us to follow science. Let me tell you something. Science isn't there. The facts are all over the place. Let me give you a little bit of rundown. President Trump said this about Dr. Fauci. He said he's a nice man, but he's made a lot of mistakes. And he was absolutely right in saying that. A list of past comments made by experts, which have turned out being inaccurate, reports NBC, but they are very accurate. The list includes comments made in last January, that coronavirus, which has infected more than 3 million Americans at that time, quote, by Dr. Fauci, was not a major threat. That's what he said. It also highlighted Dr. Fauci saying that the virus was, quote, not driven by asymptomatic carriers. We know that it is. And his comment in March that people should not be walking around with masks. He said this. Lots of people concerned about the number of times Dr. Fauci has been wrong on things. Dr. Fauci heads the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and has been a prominent figure during the U.S.'s fight against the pandemic. Let me give you a couple of add-ons to this. Dr. Fauci is the highest paid government official in the United States. He makes $417,608 a year. The president makes $400,000. By the way, he's 80 years old. He's long past retirement, and he should have been retiring a long time ago. But let me tell you, I digress a little bit. Let me get back to the article to tell you a couple things. So when AIDS came out, he had seen several things going on, and I'm going to tell you about that in a moment. But he dismissed the President Trump's efforts to promote a known malaria medication as treatment for several corona patients as anecdotal, even though 7 years beforehand he backed the exact same drug for the exact same thing. He's publicly taken projections from an institute created in Washington State by the Gates Foundation, the same foundation that virtually owns the WHO, the World Health Organization, and owns major stakes in the leading vaccine makers. When questioned how long the shutdown of much of the U.S. economy would last, Fauci replied, only when there is 0 new COVID positive test cases, something, by the way, is absolutely impossible once a virus is out. He said then that you can lift it. He's also backed direct human tests of novel vaccines with no prior animal tests. Fauci has more influence over U.S. national policy on the unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic than anyone else in the country. Much of the media treats him with awe and unimpeachable scientist, as an unimpeachable scientist, one of the world's finest. A closer look, though, at Anthony Fauci's career gives a starkly different picture, a very alarming one, in fact. Tony Fauci has held the top post at NIAID in Washington for now astonishing 37 years. Today, he's well past retirement age at 80, as I said, holds the funds to determine which drug companies or university researchers will get precious government funds or not from NIAID's annual $5 billion budget. So people have accused him of investing in those companies, but he's actually giving money to them. So let's go back to 1984, when Fauci was named head of NIAID during the Reagan era. That year, an AIDS researcher, Robert Gallo, worked under Fauci, had a press conference to announce that he had discovered the AIDS virus, published scientific evidence, including the required electron microscope analysis to determine if it was there. And that a genetic test and a viral load test were needed to detect if AIDS were present. In a sharp rebuttal of the Gallo claims, and claims endorsed by Fauci, Roberto Gerardo, MD of Haven Medical Science, the scientist who produced the first electron micrograph of the retrovirus of AIDS, pointed out that viral load tests don't work, and the 2 major tests used to determine if one had AIDS by Fauci are invalid. He said none of these tests detect the HIV virus itself, nor did he detect HIV particles. By the way, he was absolutely right. Fauci claimed there was a cure and gave billions to research a cure for AIDS. There is no cure for AIDS. And by the way, research by Professor Giordano said otherwise, and they were right. Yet this fraud had shaped the career of Tony Fauci for more than 35 years. Fauci, as head of NIAID, has taken millions from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as the Clinton Foundation, along with tens of billions from U.S. taxpayers for this bogus research. So Fauci and COVID-19. In October 2019, Fauci and his NIAID group got $100 million from the Gates Foundation to develop gene-based therapies for HIV and sickle cell disease. That means at the time of the first claims of novel coronavirus in Wuhan, China, Fauci was still promoting a 35-year-old fraud around HIV. Fauci is also part of the Gates Foundation cabal. In 2012, Fauci was named one of the 5 leadership councils of the Gates Foundation created Global Vaccine Action Plan. So Fauci is a liar. And I don't say that lightly. He's lied to the general public and he's used taxpayer money to do it. And now he's telling us that the science tells us they have no science. He says one thing one time and then he backs up and says something else. How many of you understand that? So you can follow the science. What that means is you're following a yo-yo that goes back and forth. Let me give you a little bit more. It's going on in New World Order. Look, locked out by Twitter for telling the truth. Welcome to the club. This pastor says, after preaching at my home congregation Sunday morning, I get into my car in the church parking lot to check my voicemails and messages. One of my colleagues had sent me the link to his new article, which I decided to share with my Twitter followers. To my surprise, I discovered I was locked out of my account for 24 hours for violating Twitter rules. But what did I do? What were the violations? There was no further information, no link to file an appeal, and no reference to an offending tweet. I was left in the dark, forcing me to search online for a way to appeal the suspension. Obviously, this was not a serious crisis, and like many other conservatives, I knew my time on Twitter might be limited. Still, I was wondering what offense had I committed. Minutes later, I had my answer. Figures. It was my tweet about Biden's transgender nominee. I was informed that I had been locked out of my account for 12 hours because of this tweet posted on January 20th. Here it was. Will I get punished by Twitter, he said, for saying that in God's sight, Rachel Levine, nominated by Biden to be his assistant secretary for his HHS, is a man. That's what he said. Yes, that was the offending tweet. By the way, if you don't know who she is, he is. Whatever it is. I don't want to comment. But either sex, it's not a pretty sight. Okay. Yes, that was the offending tweet. It looks like Twitter answered his question. When biographical truth conflicts with the transgender activism, biological truth is banned. When biblical truth conflicts with the transgender activism, biblical truth is banned. There was nothing hateful in the tweet. There was nothing that would have incited violence. I don't even dead name Levine, referring to him as Richard. I simply stated the truth inside of God. President Biden's nominee for Assistant Secretary for Health and Human Services is a man. Let me restate that. That is a man. Now, back to his tweet. Really? Blocking him? What violation of the rules? So he read Twitter's rules. On the category of safety are listed subcategories: violence, terrorism, violent extremism, child sexual exploitation, abuse, harassment, hateful conduct, suicide or self-harm, sensitive material, including graphic violence and adult content, and illegal or certain regulated goods and services. Then I read the category of privacy and then authenticity. What rule had I violated? Where had I sinned? What was my transgression? And I reread the verbiage under hateful conduct, which stated, you may not promote violence against, threaten, or harass other people on the basis of race, ethnicity, or national origin, caste, sexual orientation, gender identity, religious affiliation, age, disability, or serious disease. So what did he do? He didn't do any of those things. So what Twitter decided to do was to block him because they didn't like his statement, because they didn't like the fact that he said in God's eyes that this person is still a man. How many believe in God's eyes this person is still a man? It is. So he was saying something truth. But the problem was biblical facts were going against the culture. It was going against the woke mentality. So Facebook on their own decides that they're going to be the critics and they're going to say who they're going to throw off and who they're not. Let me tell you, this is just the start of it. They're going to continue to throw people off. Banning President Trump. And by the way, I feel really great because I was banned from Twitter before he was. So let me tell you, they're going to continue to do that. Why? Not because we're aggravating them, because they don't want any contrary opinions. If you have their opinion, you're fine. If you have a different opinion, even if it's a biblical opinion, you're not fine, you're out. All right, let's give a little bit more. So Facebook did the same thing. They censor a Mexican cardinal. Facebook censored it again, this time censoring a cardinal who claimed that globalist leaders are using the coronavirus pandemic to bring about a new world order. I don't know why he said that. Let me say what I think. I think globalist leaders are using the coronavirus to bring about a new world order. That's what I think. Same thing he thinks. Facebook exhibited a grayed out screenshot emblazoned with the banner, false information. Underneath, Facebook added, this publication repeats information about COVID-19 that independent fact checkers deemed false. I'd like to interview the fact checkers. I'd like to find out what their facts are. Who says that their facts are right? So they do, obviously, and so they hold the big stick, so they kick people off. All right, let me give you a little bit more, because it's definitely getting to that spot. Let's see where I want to go here. Let's go to Israel, because Biden's made a lot of decisions about Israel, and they're not good. Biden appoints anti-Israeli Muslim to top intelligence position. President Biden's two newest appointees, by the way, he's made 33 executive orders so far. 33 of them. It's unprecedented, and most of them are, listen, if you read the fine print, even if you read the bold print in it, most of them are very, very damning to the American freedoms. President Biden's two newest appointees to top intelligence positions are reasons for concern. Though one is Jewish, the other is Palestinian American, and both are decidedly anti-Israeli. It's interesting to see that Jewish people are anti-Israeli. Let me give you a perfect example. He's been seen everywhere lately. Anybody know what I'm talking about? Bernie Sanders. Just look at any picture that's on Facebook. He's everywhere. And he is anti-Israeli. And he's a Jew. President Joe Biden just appointed Maher Bitar as a senior intelligence advisor for the National Security Council. The Office for Intelligence receives sensitive information from the intelligence agencies and coordinates covert action activities between the White House and the intelligence community. The National Security Council also stores the most sensitive classified information. Bitar was Congressman Adam Schiff's top legal advisor. Bitar, he says Israeli occupation is a catastrophe of 1948. He lamented the dissolution and disappearance of an internationally recognized political entity to which the Palestinians belong. He's saying they are an international group that should be recognized as a state. Avril Haines, anti-Israel, connects to the Qatar and BDS. The Senate also confirmed Avril Haines as Biden's director of national intelligence, who signed a letter to the Democratic Party saying that their platform should include language critical of Israel, express sympathy with the Palestinians, and object to Jews living in Judea and Samaria as preparation for a two-state solution. So already he is doing things to aggravate Israel. Here's another one. Biden's Iran policy could put it on a collision course with Israel. As the United States enters the Biden era, Senator Ted Cruz, by the way, who's fast becoming my hero, warns that relationship between Washington and Jerusalem is poised to become particularly fragile, mainly because he believes the policies the new administration will pursue with respect to Iran will pose significant security challenges for Israel. U.S. President Joe Biden has already stated that he plans to negotiate a nuclear deal with Iran in lieu of the 2015 accord from which outgoing President Donald Trump withdrew in 2018. I think, Cruz says this, I think the greatest national security threat to Israel that will be posed by the Biden-Harris administration will be their attempt to re-establish the disastrous Iran nuclear deal. Under President Obama, the signature so-called foreign policy achievement of his second term was sending hundreds of billions of dollars to Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei as part of the 2015 nuclear deal, who regularly chants death to America and death to Israel. And by the way, he does that on Facebook and Twitter. The Biden-Harris administration will set as their top foreign policy objective, restoring the failed agreement. I fear we are headed into a dangerous chapter with the Biden-Harris administration, Cruz said, working actively to undermine the national security gains made in the last 4 years and to reinvigorate the Ayatollahs in Iran, which poses an existential threat to Israel. Cruz further stated that he believes that the Democratic Party has been overrun by the radical forces within it. He's absolutely right. The voices who are setting the agenda are Senators Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They are unapologetic socialists. They are advocating abolishing the police, packing the U.S. Supreme Court, and ushering in fundamental transformation of American society. Cruz is still talking. I don't believe the voters want that. I don't believe that is consistent with the views and the values of the American people. There is, to be sure, an anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic far left in the Democratic Party. And with Democratic majorities, that extreme faction will have greater influence. That being said, for 8 years, I've endeavored to be to be the leading defender of Israel in the United States Senate, and I intend to continue to do so. That's great news because I really believe we need somebody on our side there. Here's another one. New fears Biden will revive international criminal court action against Israel. The change in administration in the U.S. has led fears that the ICC will renew its criminal case against Israel. If successful, the case brought by the PLO would call for the European countries to arrest Israeli officials who traveled outside the Holy Land. The ICC, by the way, it's the International Criminal Court, established in 1998, currently has 123 member states, including the state of Palestine. That's part of it, although Palestine isn't a state. But ironically, Israel's not part of it. And so the investigation recommended bringing charges against Israel for transferring civilian populations to occupied territory after 2014. So the ICC and Obama, Trump, and now Biden. These ICC investigations have been rejected as illegitimate by former Obama administration officials in charge of the ICC and detainee issues by over 330 members of Congress from both parties, as well as the Trump administration. So Obama didn't like the ICC. Can you imagine? Trump didn't like the ICC. But Biden now loves the ICC. Biden has largely remained silent about his intentions in this issue, though some pundits suggest the ICC is waiting for approval from Biden in order to pursue the case against Israel. Since the ICC began in 2002, it has spent some $2 billion in taxpayer money to achieve 8 convictions, just 4 of them for major crimes. The top candidate to replace Bensouda in the ICC is Fergal Gainon, currently a leading external advocate of the ICC cases against the U.S. and Israel. So again, we're watching the pressure go to Israel. How many of you know, I will bless those who bless you, I will curse those who curse you? Here, you've been thinking about it. Here's this one. The Palestinian plan to dupe the Biden administration. So Muhammad Abbas has now, I'll tell you what this says. Muhammad Abbas is now going to have free elections. That's an oxymoron in Palestine, by the way, or in the Palestinian territory. He's going to have free elections. Now, Trump was asking him to do that, and he wouldn't do it. He stayed away from Trump, didn't say anything about Trump. He's going to have free elections, which means he's going to be elected again because they do have fixed elections. And now he's going to do it, and he's going to do it so he can appease the world and the international community, saying that he is fair in Israel. So there's only one word to describe Abbas's announcement. It's deception. The proposed Palestinian elections are part of a scheme designed to deceive the international community, specifically the U.S. and the EU, into believing that the Palestinians are serious about implementing major reforms, ending financial administration corruption, and engaging in another peace process with Israel. Abbas, who boycotted President Trump's administration since December of 2017, is hoping that the Biden administration will, among other things, resume financial aid to the Palestinians and the United Nations Relief and Work Agency for Palestinian Refugees, reopen the PLO diplomatic mission in Washington, D.C., which Trump closed, and cancel the U.S. recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I'll tell you what, we cancel the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and you can kiss America goodbye. I'm just telling you that. All right, let's go a little bit further. These are serious things. Let's talk about the economy, the Great Reset, and the magic money tree. If you knew where the tree grew money from its branches settled, wouldn't you want to just shake it? Of course you would. In fact, you'd want to shake it as often as you could. Reports are now surfacing showing that voters are becoming upset that their elected representatives will not send out the campaign promise of a direct payment of $2,000. Listen to this one. When announcing his $1.9 trillion stimulus package, Biden skimped on his vow. He promised $2,000 payment with a new promise. He vowed that, and now he's saying, no, I'm going to give you $1,400, which would top off the $600 that was sent to Americans under President Trump. So now listen to this quote. If you send John and the Reverend to Washington, those $2,000 checks will go out the door, restoring hope and decency so many people who are struggling right now. Too many people. Biden said at a rally for Senators Raphael Warnock and John Ossoff. Both Warnock and Ossoff made it a point to make the promise of $2,000 payments a part of their bid to obtain votes from the people of Georgia for their Senate seats. Regilio Linares, of Atlanta native and Democratic canvasser during the runoff elections, told Mediate that he feels like, quote, and I'm not going to even say it, it's an expletive, over the fact that the next stimulus payment may not be as large as he was promised, and called it a betrayal of the working class. This is a Democrat who canvassed the area. He says, I was on the ground and I knocked over 2,000 doors, and I said, at the doors I was literally telling people, $2,000 checks, you can rely on this. I'm a man of principle and morals and of my word. And now I feel like, and he says it again, I lied to them. I was lying to them the whole time. I was lying to people that were relying on this. At the time, I didn't know it was a lie, but that was not the reality. This is a pretty much betrayal of the working class. I know people are ticked off about it, he added. Another Georgia voter, Justin Wade, says that it's a bad sign that those elected in the state do not appear to be willing to follow through on the promised welfare. So Biden was telling them, if you vote for these two for the Senate, we will give you, I promise you, I'll give you $2,000 checks. They were saying, we will give you $2,000 checks. Now it's down to $1,400. Not that that's good, but they lied. Warnock, Ossoff, Kamala, and others all pushed for $2,000 checks, but none of them have called on Biden to push on the $2,000 checks in addition to the $600 checks, he told the Mediate. Considering the Democrats control Congress and the presidency, they could have pushed for more if they wanted to. This is a bad sign for how they will govern in the next 4 years. Let me tell you something, they're going to have their hands full in the next 4 years. Everything laid out above is a consequence of the collaboration between central banks and governments. They take care of citizens with their abilities to print money and push the worry of deficit into the future. Rob from Peter, pay Paul. The Great Reset, a World Economic Forum globalist, Klaus Schwab, predicted that the effects of the initial stimulus efforts by governments to keep both individuals and businesses afloat in the aftermath of the unprecedented lockdowns would create a scenario where the public would keep elected officials under fierce and relentless pressure to continue the schemes of helicopter money well into the future. What he's saying is this, is that you just start giving, you opened up this tree, you start shaking the tree, you gave it to everybody, and they're going to continue to want that. They're going to continue to want that as long as you're in office. It certainly wasn't the hardest thing to predict, that people would have an aha moment after getting a taste of the money printer printing its money. It was a line that was crossed and a political decision that would likely be incredibly hard to reverse in the future. As we have written about before, the introduction of stimulus payments since March 2020 looked a lot like a universal basic income scheme. That's socialism, by the way. It's likely to continue well into the future to keep the public content with the status quo. Janet Yellen, who said at her confirmation hearing that Congress should act big on relief spending and worry about debt later. That's pathetic. That is absolutely pathetic. Ben Franklin had a quote that everyone should keep in the back of his head, her head. I read this, I think, last week. He said this, when the people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic. And that's exactly what's happening. All right, let's talk about Joe Biden, not that I want to, and his Catholicism. Did you know that the Pope loves him? He absolutely loves him. Now you have to understand Catholicism. Let me give you a little bit rundown first. Joe Biden, they're saying, the media is saying, the false media, that he is a great Catholic. He is a liberal Catholic. There's a difference. I was brought up Catholic. Joe Biden would have been thrown out of my church. I'm going to tell you why. He would have been excommunicated. Because before 1960, I could not even play a game with a Protestant. I couldn't be friends with a Protestant. I couldn't go to a Protestant church. I would be excommunicated. Then in 1960, they had the Vatican II. Vatican II opened up relations, and instead of Protestants being the evil ones, they now became the estranged brothers. And then liberalism started to crawl into the Catholic Church, and it started to crawl in with different things that they were debating, whether nuns could be ordained, whether priests could be married. It started getting voted down. By the end of the 60s, it had died. Liberal Catholicism had died. But now you have a Pope Francis, and he is a liberal. He's a leftist Catholic. How many are getting this? Biden is a leftist Catholic. So when we say Catholic, it's not the same way I was brought up. The inauguration of our second Catholic president was in a way a very American Catholic spectacle. A Jesuit delivered the invocation. The president quoted St. Augustine and paused for a moment, a silent prayer just long enough for a quick Hail Mary. And the justices and celebrities represented various ethnic Catholic inheritances. Irish for John Roberts, Italian for Lady Gaga and Nancy Pelosi, Latina for Jennifer Lopez and Sonia Sotomayor. It was left to Garth Brooks singing Amazing Grace to represent Protestant culture. Even Biden's proposed cabinet is stuffed with Catholic Democrats with few white male Protestants in sight. Many emergent forces are changing liberalism's relationship to religion, wokeness, secularization, and even paganism. But the new president personally embodies none of them. Instead, he has elevated his own liberal Catholicism to the center of our national life. Calling a form of religion liberal can mean two different things. On the one hand, a theological liberalism which seeks an evolution in doctrine to adopt to modern needs. On the other, support for policies and parties on the center left. And that's what the Catholic Church is becoming. They're supporting the policies of the left. Now, you may ask yourself a question. How in the world can they support gay rights? How in the world can they support abortion? Well, it's the liberal Catholics. Now watch, because I want you to really hear it. The American Catholic Church as an institution is caught between the two political coalitions. But most prominent Catholic Democrats are liberals in theology and politics alike. Liberal Catholicism is a culture recognized in illusions. And of course, invocations of Pope Francis a decade ago was commonplace to regard liberal Catholicism in decline. But then Francis gave the liberal tendency new life, reopening controversies that conservatives assumed were closed, and tilting the Vatican towards cooperation with the liberal left and the establishment and away from associations with conservatism. There seems to be no little doubt that many figures in Francis' inner circle welcome a Biden presidency. When the American bishop's statement on his inauguration included a stern critique in his position on abortion, these are Catholic bishops. They gave him a warning on his position on abortion. There was apparent pushback from the Vatican and explicit pushback from the most Francis-aligned of the American cardinals. So the conservative Catholics who spent the election year arguing that Biden isn't a Catholic in good standing find themselves, not for the first time, in a tacit conflict with their Pope who condones abortion. Now, don't tell me that we're not in the last days. Don't tell me there's not going to be a false prophet backing somebody who's political, because you're seeing it right now. We are not in the tribulation, but you are seeing something that is unheralded. It's never happened before. So, and did you know that Anthony Fauci was educated by liberal Jesuits also, Catholic Jesuits? Says Biden's past pro-life positions have now been entirely subsumed. He used to believe in pro-life. That's who used to vote, pro-life. But now no longer. For instance, by his party's orthodoxy on abortion. Or alternatively, it is in danger of being effectively taken over from within by rival forms of faith, like the new progressive orthodoxies that are likely to set our Catholic president's agenda on the social questions of the day. Liberal Catholicism, brought back from what had seemed its twilight years to this unsuspected apotheosis, is ready to accept anything, and it is. So when we talk about Catholic anymore, it's not the same word that we're talking about Catholic. There's two divisions. There is the Catholicism that holds true to the old standards, that abortion is wrong and that life is sacred, and there's new Catholics like your Pope and like Biden and like Pelosi and like Schumer and like Ocasio-Cortez. They believe abortion's okay because they're liberal Catholics, which tells me they're not religious at all. They are secular. Let me go on a little bit further. So, the new religious extremists, evangelical Christians, and pro-life activism. If you cherish faith, family, and freedom, you might want to keep a low profile for a while. The Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2021 has been unveiled in Congress, and it has bipartisan support. Let me tell you, sometimes there is no difference between Democrats and Republicans. They're both selling us out. It is essentially the Patriot Act on steroids. Now, if you know what the Patriot Act was, President Bush put that in effect after 9/11. It was to hunt down extremists in America. It was to hunt down jihadists. It was to be able to wiretap on them without having any court orders. It was to be able to eavesdrop and do all kinds of surveillance because we had an existential threat through the terrorists that were coming, Islamic terrorists. So the Patriot Act was given. It has never been repealed, and now it's gone on steroids. Let me tell you why. We're being told it's almost certain that some version of the legislation will make it to Biden's desk for him to sign in the next month. Unfortunately, it appears that this bill is meant to specifically target certain groups, and you may discover that you're a member of one or more of these groups. Those that drafted this new law say that it will help authorities go after, quote, extremists, and very few of us would consider ourselves to be one of those. But the definition of an extremist has changed. It's no longer an Islamic terrorist. This new law appears to be targeting almost half the country. It's fundamentally un-American to specifically target people for their religious beliefs. And so that is extremely alarming. People with certain political perspectives are likely to be targeted as well. Remember when Kamala Harris said, if you voted for Trump, we're coming after you? This is the bill that'll help her do that. You start looking at, obviously, have to be a white person. Obviously, likely male, libertarians, anyone who loves freedom, liberty, maybe has an American flag outside their house, or people who attended a Trump rally. So wait a second, this writer says, I am a male. I love freedom and liberty. I'm flying an American flag outside my house right now. I'm white. Am I going to be put on the list somehow? During a recent television interview with former CIA Director John Brennan said that the Biden administration will likely be focusing on religious extremists, nativists, and even libertarians as possible targets. So how did it get from people who took down the trade centers as extremists to conservative Christians are now extremists? Listen, we are living in a whole different world. In what universe is saying something like that okay? Joe Biden has already instructed his Director of National Intelligence to identify potential extremist threats. Domestic violence extremism is in the country as the new administration seeks to tackle what it calls a serious and growing national security threat. Let me just add something right now. So when we saw Portland and Minneapolis burning, and we saw Seattle burning, and they could have called out the National Guard, but they never did. They let it burn. And now we have actually 7,000 National Guard are still in Washington, D.C. Nobody's destroying anything in Washington, D.C., but they're still there. And so you can see the dichotomy of what's going on here. The move is one of several White House press secretary announced Friday to address mounting concerns about domestic terrorism and extreme. There is that word extremism again. And the new White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, has been using it repeatedly during her press. They're brainwashing people. In the old days, we assumed that extremists were crazy terrorists and suicide bombers in the Middle East. But now they're using the term to describe large numbers of people who live inside the United States. That's extremely chilling, by the way. And once extremists have been identified, we are being told that the White House National Security Council will be tasked with building capacity to tackle and disrupt extremist networks. If the Biden administration truly wanted to go after domestic terrorists, they aren't hard to find. In fact, a whole bunch of them attacked an ICE facility in Portland on Saturday night. Dramatic videos posted on Twitter showed the crowd chanting, "No borders, no nations, abolish deportations." According to the Daily Mail, insurgents in Portland have now been committing political violence for 4 days in a row. There they are, Mr. Biden, go get them. But he's not. Listen, we are witnessing a very frightening terror attack at a church in California. The FBI has launched an investigation after a bomb was thrown at a church known for its stance against the LGBT movement in California just weeks after the pastor received an arson attack threat. Sadly, these are not the sorts of extremists that the Democrats have in mind. They're doing nothing about them. Instead, they appear to be very interested in identifying and deprogramming those that voted for Donald Trump. Since when can't you vote for who you want to vote for? Since now. How many are with me? A Democratic National Committee official, David Atkins, said on Twitter that deprogramming is needed for every one of the more than 74 million people who voted for Donald Trump on November 3rd. Are you kidding me? Rush Limbaugh said they are literally thinking of deprogramming conservatives. It's why the left is cheering big tech's embrace of cancel culture and pushing cable providers to stop airing One American News Network, Newsmax, and other conservative influences. And it's why 250 publishing professionals feel comfortable circulating a no books deal for traders petition that says former Trump officials shouldn't be allowed to publish their works. It's also why Harvard students think it's reasonable to circulate a letter demanding the revocation of degrees earned by Republicans who questioned the 2020 election, and why MoveOn.org demands that the Senate not give Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley any committee assignments. Now that Democrats have full power in Washington, it's open season on Trump and all of his supporters. But the truth is that the vast majority of the civil unrest over the past year has been caused by radicals on the left, and it's only going to get worse in the months and the years to come. For the past 12 months, there have been political violence somewhere in America on an almost nightly basis. But because leftists are involved in 99% of the time, the corporate media generally ignores most of it. You can't just be against a political violence when the other side does it. Sadly, it appears that the people committing most of the political violence will be handled with kid gloves by this new administration. It's getting bad. How many can say it's getting bad? All right, it's getting real. But here you go. That's scary just to look at. But listen to this. The real cost of President Biden's radical transgender activism. Of all things the incoming President Joe Biden could do in his first day in office, why was one of them signing a radical executive order promoting transgender activism? On January 25, 2020, Biden tweeted, "Let's be clear, transgender equality is the civil rights issue of our time." That's a lie, by the way. There is no room for compromise when it comes to basic human rights. Well, that certainly sounds good. Who among us would want to compromise when it comes to basic human rights? But that's not what it's all about. It's about prioritizing the perceived needs of those who identify as transgender, meaning those who do not feel at home with their biological sex, to the point that the rights of others are negatively impacted. We're not talking about a legitimate civil rights issue, such as telling a black man he cannot drink from a white man's water fountain, or telling a black woman she can't sit in a white man's seat on a bus. As nice as the wording sounds, we should make no mistake about it. This will negatively impact your children, especially your daughters. We're talking about 6-year-old girls being forced to share their school bathroom with a biological boy who believes he's a girl. We're talking about a 17-year-old girl being told she must share her school locker room with a biological male who wants to play on the girls' softball team. And we're talking about the same 17-year-old girl missing out on a prize scholarship because she was bested by her biological male peer who identifies as a female. To quote the executive order, quote, this is from Biden, children should be able to learn without worrying about whether they will be denied access to the restroom, the locker room, or school sports. That's why author Abigail Shrier tweeted on day one, Biden unilaterally eviscerated women's sports. Any educational institution that receives federal funding must admit biologically male athletes to women's teams, women's scholarships, etc. A new glass ceiling was just placed over all of our girls. Over the past few years, athletes, coaches, and parents have been watching in disbelief as girls are being replaced on the women's podium on the winners' podium by boys who identify as girls at all levels of competition. This is just not right, let alone a matter of civil rights. This is a matter of unfair discrimination. As for the simple matter of bathrooms, there are numerous documented reports of girls feeling so uncomfortable with the presence of boys in their school bathrooms that they refrain from relieving themselves the entire day at school. Others wear their gym clothes under their regular clothes lest they be forced to change in the presence of a boy. What happened to the basic human rights of these girls? An unfair competitive advantage. Earlier this month, NBC News reported that, quote, a new study suggests transgender women maintain an athletic advantage over their cisgender peers even after a year on hormone therapy. Last December, the UK Guardian reported that, quote, a groundbreaking new study on transgender athletes has found trans women retain 22% advantage in running tests even after taking hormones for 2 years to suppress their testosterone. As for those who say, well, how common is this anyway? Why make such a big deal about it? Well, the answer is very question you asked. If so few people identify as transgender, why sign an executive order affecting everyone else just for them? It also states adults should be able to earn a living and pursue a vocation, knowing that they will not be fired, demoted, or mistreated because of whom they go home with, or because of how they dress does not conform to sex-based stereotypes. Does this mean that if Jack, who is clearly a biological male, now identifies as Jane and wants to be hired as a nursery school teacher, the school must hire him? Does it matter that a 4-year-old kid will be asking the man why the man is wearing a dress? And is there a reason for the order does not contain the words religion or religious a single time? What about those who with biblically based convictional differences? Would churches be exempt? What about religious schools? Under President Obama, more than 20 states took his administration to court, fighting against this similarly radical transgender activism in the schools. Obama threatened to withhold federal funding if the schools were not complicit. Under President Trump, this was overturned, only to have it now reinstated by President Biden. And as nice as the wording sounds, we should make no mistake about it. This will negatively impact your children, especially your girls. So here's the bottom line. Love every person and resist every dangerous agenda. By the way, transsexuals are less than 1% of the American population. To be sure, every one of us should show love to those struggling with gender identity, confusion, be they children or adults. And if a school can accommodate a trans-identified child by allowing them to use a private restroom, that hurts no one. But we don't turn the world upside down to accommodate the struggles of less than 1% of the population. And by all means, we don't strip away the rights of others on their behalf. Let us be prepared then to love every trans person we meet while pushing back against this dangerous agenda every way we can. It's the least we can do. It seems like when a couple months ago or even weeks ago, I was telling you about locusts invading the planet and I thought that was the big news. Well, here's another one, just to give you a little bit more. More locusts are coming for East Africa. The year 2020 brought a massive locust plague that caused widespread destruction of crops and livelihoods in East African nations. The COVID-19 pandemic has only added to the catastrophe, and about 35 million people have been left in a state of food insecurity. Now, the United Nations has warned that a second and maybe even deadlier reinvasion of locusts have already begun. Adult locusts from last year's swarm have already laid their eggs. The amount of rain in the next couple months will determine the severity of the locust plague this year. The wetter the weather, the more severe the infestation will be. Locusts reproduce prolifically at a rate of 20-fold per generation. So whatever we had last year, 20 times more are coming this year. The Bible records that a massive invasion of locusts was one of the plagues that devastated Egypt, and preceded the exodus of the Israelites from bondage. That's Exodus chapter 10, by the way. Officials worry that collateral damage from the locust invasion will cause cross-border problems between African nations and destabilize already weak governments. By the way, Bible prophecies foretell that even greater plagues lie ahead as we approach the end of the age. It's Revelation chapter 9, verses 15 and 16. So, there's a lot going on. Can I give you my closing comments? 4 of you, let's all step over there and I'll give you my closing. Can I give you my closing comments? All right, here you go. This is from my heart. You ready? Let me give them to you. It's a partial rundown, very partial, on how the liberal left has no morals, no rules, and no logic. So, let's see if I have this correct. In liberal America, you can get arrested for hunting and fishing without a license, but not for entering and remaining in the country illegally. In liberal America, you have to get your parents' permission to go on a field trip or to take an aspirin in school, but not to get an abortion or a change of sex. In liberal America, you have to agree that the environment needs to be cleaned up so we can breathe better, but you deny breath to 63 million aborted babies. In liberal America, you must show your identity to board a plane, cash a check, buy liquor, or check out a library book, but not to vote for who runs the country. In liberal America, stable law-abiding citizens can't own gun magazines that carry more than 10 rounds, but 20 F-16 fighter jets, state-of-the-art fighter jets, are given to crazy new leaders in Egypt. In liberal America, in the nation's largest city, New York, you can buy 2 16-ounce sodas, but not one 24-ounce soda, because the sugary drink might make you fat. In liberal America, city after liberal city can shut down churches, restaurants, and gatherings when COVID levels are rising, but open those same cities up when a Democrat becomes president, even though the COVID epidemic is 3 times higher than when they first shut everything down. In liberal America, an 80-year-old woman who is confined to a wheelchair or a 3-year-old girl can be strip searched by a TSA at the airport, but a woman in a burqa or hijab is only subject to having her neck and her head searched. In liberal America, a new president promises millions of new jobs, but shuts down major pipelines that eliminate thousands of people currently working. And just consider this. If you cross the border illegally in Afghanistan, you get shot. If you cross the border illegally in Saudi Arabia, you'll be jailed. If you cross the border illegally in China, you may never be heard from again. If you cross the border illegally in Venezuela, you'll be branded a spy and your fate will be sealed. If you cross the border in Cuba illegally, you'll be thrown into political prison to rot. But if you cross the border illegally in the United States, you get a job, a driver's license, a social security card, welfare, food stamps, credit cards, subsidized rent or a loan to buy a house, free education, free health care, a lobbyist in Washington, billions of dollars worth of public documents in your language, the right to carry your country's flag while you protest that you don't get enough respect, and in many cases you can vote. And oh yeah, you get a president that will cater to you while he ignores the rest of America. And that's what I have to say for tonight. All right, that's in the news for tonight. And I'm still on Facebook.